Welcome to Practice Doula, the podcast for midwives at every stage of the journey. Whether you're exploring the calling, navigating school, launching your first practice, or evolving as a seasoned birth worker, this is your space for support, insight, and inspiration. I'm your host, Kim Pekin, certified nurse midwife, certified professional midwife, former birth center owner, and midwifery mentor. Let's grow together, one courageous step at a time. So this is our first episode. The title of the episode is Welcome to Practice Doula, My Story and Why This Podcast Exists. So where does my story start? I think it starts when I was a little child. I always had this fascination with birth. My Barbies, they were always pregnant. Didn't know where Ken was, but Barbie was always pregnant and having babies. My mom bought the book, what was it called? A Child is Born, by Leonard Nilsson. And I used to just read that book over and over again and look at the pictures of all the babies in utero. And I was just fascinated by birth and by the whole process of pregnancy and breastfeeding and all of that. So I think my journey started there. I was probably about 6 or 7, 8 years old at the most. No, 6 or 7, I think. So I was like a little kid, totally into it. When I was 17, I was a labor coach for a friend of mine who was giving birth and relinquishing her baby for adoption. And that would just changed my life. I was so enthralled with the whole birth experience and what it was like to be there for his first breath and to be there for my friend. And it just made a huge, huge impression on me as a teenager. And then when I had my own babies, of course, I was really into it. I didn't know about midwives, though, and I'm not sure why. I mean, when I started having babies, it was 1989, and midwives weren't really something that my friends talked about. I didn't know where to find one or why someone would want one. I thought, midwives kind of went out of fashion in the 1800s, but boy, was I wrong. After 2 hospital births that were okay, but not what I really wanted, I started to think maybe I was wrong about all of this. Maybe birth isn't this great, wonderful experience. Maybe it's better to have an epidural and all of that. 3rd baby, that's what I did. I had an epidural, and I hated that. It was not a good experience. I just felt so disconnected from what was going on. And I didn't like it. I didn't like not being present. So the next baby that I had, number 4, I at that point was a La Leche League leader, and I met other La Leche League leaders, and they were all having their babies at home. And I thought, wow, you can do that. And so I started exploring home birth and midwifery, and I read Natural Childbirth the Bradley Way. And my husband and I signed up for Bradley classes, and we found a midwife at Birth Care and Women's Health in Alexandria and had a great experience. It was so empowering, and I went into it with so many doubts about my body and my ability to do the work of birth. All my other births, I'd had Pitocin because my contractions weren't strong enough, and just a lot of interventions that in retrospect weren't necessary. It was more like, I don't know, I just was anxious to see my baby, and anything that I was told that they could do to speed it up, I was all for that. But with my home birth, it was a different story. And my husband and I worked together, and it was just this kind of magical experience. And afterwards, my midwife put my baby in my arms, and after everything kind of calmed down a little bit, she whispered in my ear and she said, "See, your body knew just what to do." And it was just mind blown. I needed to make sure that other women could experience what I had experienced with my midwife and with my husband, and to birth under their own power. So that was kind of the beginning. I had another home birth with a different midwife. That midwife became my mentor and my preceptor. And I decided to go back to school. Wasn't sure how I was going to make that work. Here I was a mother of 5 plus 2 stepchildren. I just wasn't sure. I was really unsure about it. And I couldn't justify at that time spending the money on going to becoming a nurse midwife. I would have to be an RN, and then I'd have to get my master's degree. And the thought of that was just too much. And so I found out about the CPM and decided to pursue that path. And the school that I found was National Midwifery Institute, and I did the program there. So I did the didactic work with my school, and then I did all of my clinical work with my preceptor, who had been my midwife. And the requirements were a little bit different back then. They didn't have the phases for NARM. For those of you who are NARM students or student midwives or recent grads, you know about the phases. And I guess it's not that recent that started, but it was after I got my CPM. And anyway, I was off and running. And gosh, I think it was about 6 months after I started as a CPM, after I got my license, that I finally attended my first birth as the midwife, with an assistant. And it was kind of like a sink or swim kind of a situation. And that was really hard. And so I really valued having my preceptor there, and I wasn't sure what to do starting out. And, I eventually found my own groove. My preceptor and I decided to start a birth center. And we'd talked about that before I even got my CPM, and I was still a student. And so we opened Nova Natural Birth Center together. And then, I was there for a few years and then left and started my own birth center in Winchester, Virginia. And that's Premier Birth Center. And a few years into that, my former preceptor decided that it was time for her to retire. And I took over ownership of the first birth center and made that into Premier Birth Center Chantilly. And we were just rocking and rolling, and everything was going great. Got them both accredited by CABC, which was quite a journey in itself. That's a whole episode for sure to talk about. And then COVID hit, and everything kind of changed. Our census for the birth centers went up almost double overnight. And it really, I spent more and more time doing administrative work and less time taking care of people as a midwife, which I didn't really enjoy that much. I was always good at the administrative stuff, but I missed midwifery. I missed being a midwife. So I decided, I should become a CNM. Then I can expand my scope of practice, and I can prescribe and do well woman care. And so I decided to just start. And so, I'm never somebody who just kind of waits for things to happen. I've always been somebody who makes things happen. Within days, I had enrolled at my community college to do all of my prerequisites for nursing school, and had started. Did I apply then? Might have just learned what I needed to do to apply to nursing school. So I loved it. I loved the education. I loved learning more about things that I didn't know before. There were definitely some gaps in my knowledge base that nursing school filled in. I'm so thankful that I went through the CPM route and did my MEEC school, even though ultimately I ended up doing something different. It still really prepared me to be a midwife, and I value that education quite a bit. The nursing school education, boy, nursing school sucks. It's just awful. Anybody who's done it can tell you. Just about everybody hates nursing school. It was hard. It was COVID. It was, it's just terrible. And, I was in my 50s at this point. So being on my feet 12 hours straight was kind of rough. And made me really question whether I wanted to do this. But I've always been somebody who just keeps going. So I passed my NCLEX and I got my license as an RN and immediately started at Jefferson University. I went in on their advanced placement track, which meant I didn't have to wait a year and do a year of practice in the hospital before I could apply. And I also had some courses that I was able to test out of, and that helped to shorten it a bit. But still, it was 2 years at Jefferson, and it was a great experience. I loved my professors. I loved my classmates. And I graduated in May of 2024. And about 2 weeks later, I had a stroke. And that definitely rocked my world. And I think it was mostly stress-based. I think it was the stress of owning birth centers, the stress of, taking my boards and finishing up my master's degree. My work on the NARM board was stressful. Everything was just stress, just a lot. They never did find a cause, but I know it was stress. I know that's what it was. So I decided to take a step back for a bit and heal and recover. And I had a job lined up already with an OB practice. It was an OB and midwife practice. And I decided to sell my birth centers and just focus on being a hospital CNM so that I could have a predictable schedule, have a lot of support. And physically, it seemed like being in the hospital just was going to be a lot easier for me as someone who was recovering from a stroke and who was getting older. I was 58 when I had my stroke. And, in the hospital, you have nursing staff that helps you out, and, you have colleagues that you can call upon, and you have all, just like everything at your fingertips that you need, and you could still be a midwife, and you can still give that one-on-one support in the hospital. But ultimately, that practice wasn't my best fit, so ended up leaving, and I'm getting ready to start a new job as a hospital-based midwife at a different hospital, different practice, and looking forward to that. But in the interim, I decided to start Practice Doula. And the impetus for this is that all the time I'm being asked by midwives about, which path should I go? Should I do the CPM path? Should I do the CNM path? Should I do a MEEC school? Should I do PEP? How do I deal with my preceptor? How do I start a practice? How do you start a birth center? How do you get your birth center accredited? And, I get these inquiries all the time. Over the years, I've seen that the administrative side of midwifery, and I hate saying administrative because it's not just administrative, it's just all the stuff that isn't physically taking care of clients. Everything else, the other parts of midwifery, we don't have a lot of support for that. So I wanted to start Practice Doula so that I could create a space where students, aspiring midwives, experienced midwives, people retiring from the profession, where we could all kind of get together and be a community of support for each other. And then I also wanted to offer my expertise in midwifery and in running practices to help people who are starting their own practices or who want to maybe open a birth center or pursue accreditation. So I decided to offer coaching services, and I have a lot of templates, a lot of things that I've used in my own practice for informed choice documents and my care guide, things that I'm always being asked to share. So I decided to share those through Practice Doula. So I hope you can go to practicedoula.com and sign up. You can get a free membership. Just being part of the community is free. There are message boards there that are kind of in the Facebook format, if you're familiar with Facebook. So it's, I think, easy to get around, but we're going to be learning and doing this together. I'm hoping to be able to put out a few episodes a month for the podcast. It's going to be a mix of speaking to experienced midwives, students, people who are far along in their journey and thinking about retiring. I'll be doing Q&As. I'll be doing interviews, and also just speaking on different things that I've learned along the way. And so I'm hoping people will find it informative. I'm hoping people will find it friendly and helpful and supportive. And, this is a part-time thing for me. So I have to, one thing I learned from the stroke was I needed to have balance in my life and have good boundaries. And so I will just be doing this part-time, but I'm hoping the community will grow and thrive and that it will just blossom into something wonderful. So this is kind of a short episode. This is my first time doing a podcast, so I wasn't sure what to expect. But I want to end the podcast by giving you a challenge this week. So your Practice Doula challenge this week is to take one small step forward in your journey, whether that's sending an email, writing up a plan. Just take one step. Take one small step in your journey. If you're familiar with Atomic Habits, they talk about taking that little tiny step, that a habit is building on several different smaller steps. So take one step forward in your journey. So thanks for listening today to Practice Doula and getting to know me a little bit better. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share with a friend, share with a midwife, or leave a review. It helps more midwives find us. And you can learn more about Practice Doula at practicedoula.com. I'll see you next time.